Hi all, good evening. Hi Francesco, hi Giacomo. How are you doing?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? All right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
Hello,
And
everyone.
hi, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Thanks to accept our invitation, Giacomo. So it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. And it's the first time that we have three Italians in the podcast speaking in one international podcast here.
Yeah, the most dangerous thing is speaking in English. So it's we warned all of the audience. So
Yeah,
that's
usually
good.
the rule is that when you have more than one Italian in a room, everything will switch back to Italian very soon. But let's try to resist the temptation.
Yes, let's try. Francesco, you want to start with some questions for Giacomo?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have been addressing many talking points about Bitcoin these 20 episodes. The post is named the Bitcoin as a store of value because we think in our idea that in the first world that's the best starting point for the normies, people know nothing, to make it them to come closer to a Bitcoin. And then after that, they maybe understand better all of the censorship resistance, the privacy, all of the advantages this technology bring about. First of all, I want maybe also to have an opinion on our approach. And after that, that also implies that all of the different features of the Bitcoin are currently used in different parts of the world. Different features are used in different parts of the world. For example, as I said, here in the West, it's used as digital gold, store of value. But when you go to a third world, it's more used to transact. And also, there are some first attempts, like just see what Strike is doing. They also started in Europe as well. To use it as a payment rail. That's a very interesting feature, which can be can go bigger also in the first world. Do you think that when for new entrants and for educational people, like what we are trying to do here, what you do very well with your school, do you think it's better to escort the newbie and to make it have a first contact with Bitcoin by addressing the feature which makes more sense for him, whether is if the first world or for the third world or in a different part of the world where he can see actually the use case of Bitcoin in a better way. Is this the right approach for you or no?
I share your approach not only for the first word, but also in general from a theoretical point of view. I think that there is an asymmetry between store of value and medium of exchange. And the asymmetry is that medium of exchange is not an object that you do exchange. It's an object that you use for indirect exchange. So I have milk. I want beef. It's nor milk nor beef are a medium of exchange. Is only when I give you milk in exchange of shells, and then you give somebody else shells in exchange of beef. In that case, it's a medium of exchange. Only when you use it as an indirect exchange. And in order to allow for indirect exchange to increase the coincidence of wants over time and over space, it needs to be, at least to some degree, a store of value as well, because it's a delayed exchange. Basically, initially, I will give you something I have for something I don't want to consume immediately. I want to keep it for a while and then give it back to somebody else for something else that they want. So when we go beyond barter and we enter money, we assume some level of store of value for the time between the two exchanges to occur. And there is an asymmetry is also clear from the fact that all mediums of exchange are to some degree also store of value and not the other way around. So if you take, for example, real estate, a house, it is a store of value in many parts of the world, but it cannot be a medium of exchange. You can exchange a house, but not for other objects. You usually only exchange it for money, and then you exchange the money for other objects. A house is nor divisible nor fungible enough to be used in itself as a monetary tool. So it is a store of value, but not a medium of exchange. On the other hand, every medium of exchange must be, at least for the right time horizon, it must be a store of value. So there is no perfect symmetry. The store of value capacity, the store of value functionality comes first, almost at the logical point of view. And I think that reading stuff like basically Nick Szabo shelling out treatise or other sources about history of money, you can find this asymmetry emerging even in historical adoption of money. First, you start to keep these shells or beans for aesthetical uses, mostly as a store of value, and you don't use them for indirect exchange. And then when everybody accepts those things over time, you can keep them long enough to allow for you to do indirect exchange. So I think it's a general good approach to expect that first. That doesn't mean that there is no the other function. There is. It's not like a totalitarian rule that nobody can derogate from. It's just a tendency of the principle of store of value to arrive first, and then the medium of exchange will arrive later. Even from the point of view of the third world, the so-called third world, emerging markets, I'm not super bullish as of now for the medium of exchange use. The simple reason is that as of now, if we talk about physical exchanges like person-to-person exchanges, we already have a lot of alternatives to Bitcoin that are just as permissionless and as private. For example, people could go back to trade precious metals, and in some parts of the world they are, or in some parts of the world they use the currently less volatile fiat currency, which is the US dollar, as medium of exchange. And they can use cash. It's private, it's fungible, it's hard to censor. There is some problem maybe with security, because going around with a lot of cash can be a security issue. There is some problem with portability, but the problems become relevant when you have a lot of stuff to keep for a lot of time. Like, for example, Pablo Escobar, he used the US dollars as medium of exchange for drugs, and that was working fine. The problem was when he had to store the value for a long time, and then the US dollar cash was deteriorating pretty fast underground. So the problem actually with fiat cash is mostly in the medium of exchange. Also, if you think about inflation is not a huge problem as long as it's not hyperinflation. It's not a big problem for a quick medium of exchange. It becomes a problem for a reliable long-term store of value. So Escobar can ignore the dollar inflation, while a long-term saver, a long-term investor or saver cannot. So I think your approach is fine. The only, of course, again, it doesn't mean that there is no reasonable or even important use of Bitcoin as medium of exchange. For example, every time you want to pay internationally around the international sanctions, like if you want to pay to Iran for some product, or if you want to pay to India from Argentina, avoiding some kind of high bureaucratic costs. In that case, especially for international payment, you can use Bitcoin to save some political costs, non-technical costs. Bitcoin is very expensive technically, but it's politically very cheap because it's permissionless, so you don't have to ask for permission to the intermediaries. Also, if you want to pay for something private over the internet, I think Bitcoin is a good use case, a great use case as a medium of exchange, because all the other forms of payment over the internet, not the physical ones, but over the internet, they are very bad for privacy, like credit cards and stuff like that. So if you want to pay for a VPN, VPS, anonymous SIM, anonymous SMS, all this, or even a domain, all this kind of stuff, you have to pay over the internet. But or even just you want to buy fake bots on Twitter to troll people, anything that is good or bad. If you pay with credit card, your privacy is terrible, and you don't have alternative because you cannot use physical golds or dollar cash. You just have either the banking system with zero privacy or Bitcoin with a comparatively good privacy. And privacy is probably the only point in which I would differ from your stated approach, which is in the sense that I think privacy already comes packed with should already come packed with the store of value narrative. Because what is a good store of value? In my opinion, a good store of value is a good that is good at, well, sorry for the wordplay, is any resource which is good at three things. One, protecting you from supply shock. So it's a good that is not easy to print in big amounts. So that's not the case for fiat, but it is the case for gold, and even more for Bitcoin. Second, a good that will protect you from demand crisis, demand crashes. And in that case, I think Bitcoin is not very good yet. Bitcoin has a very young and unpredictable demand that goes in bubbles. Is growing over time, but is still not reliable. Is still a very volatile demand, while the supply is great. And the third component is a good that will protect you from confiscation. That's also a good store of value. For example, I have no Bitcoin, of course, but the reason that my cousin has Bitcoin as the only store of value is not even just for the supply certainty or the for the demand increase over time, but it's mostly about the unconfiscability. Basically, there is no other asset where you don't have to care for confiscation for political reasons, which I think is a very realistic threat, not only for first world people, but also for third world people, maybe especially. So I would say that store of value comes first, but privacy must be, I think, included very, very early. Of course, nobody can learn best privacy practices immediately. It will take time, but I think that privacy is part of the store of value narrative, unlike many framings that see it more connected to the medium of exchange.
No, that makes perfect sense. I do believe in these use cases. The first word of privacy, also payment rail. The asymmetry you described is what was missing in these 20 spaces, because we are talking with many Austrian economics, but nobody described this asymmetry and the fact that medium exchange implies a store of value even at first glance. That's fantastic. I would say that this asymmetry we are seeing nowadays, one day will turn into a perfect symmetry. When maybe I watched your first class you did with Safedin Amus, he said that it's all a matter of a market cap. When a market cap grows bigger and bigger, then the transition to full medium exchange and therefore perfect symmetry that realized itself. Regarding the use case of a payment rail, do you think that as something which can be beneficial for Europe and the US, I mean internally? Because we know if you have to send a wire transfer from Italy to Switzerland, very close, it's not cheap. So that could be a use case, but also to the UK, whatever is outside the Eurozone. So maybe something many people don't take into account. And also, I'm thinking about the big corporations which could find into their settlement of their internal transactions with their resellers, with their suppliers. Maybe they can set a private business network which can save a lot of money at the end of the day. Do you see any use case like that?
Yes and no. I think that the payment rail narrative is a little bit underdefined. So depending on the definition, it could be very, very strong or weaker, depending on the definition. Like payment rail could be, we just use Bitcoin to pay each other. So let's say that from Switzerland to Italy, a wire transfer is very expensive. I don't think it is anymore. As of now, from Switzerland, you can just do SEPA, and sometimes it's even instant SEPA. So it's not really that different. But let's assume that you need to pay. In that case, usually for people that are not already using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, sending your fiat to some kind of exchange or either peer-to-peer or centralized, either KYC or not, to acquire Bitcoin, then send the Bitcoin, maybe on a second layer, and then have the other party selling the Bitcoin in order to get fiat, it's usually more expensive than just to do a transfer-wise. A wire transfer, basically. So of course, if I already own Bitcoin and you already own Bitcoin, then it's way simpler, but that's because we are already using it as a store of value for both. So that's the other way around again, like we were saying before. So payment rail in this sense is not super significant unless people are already storing Bitcoin and choosing to store wealth in Bitcoin. The second option could be, as you said, internal settlement. So you have something like, again, TransferWise or Western Union, and you have a lot of settlement problems within, and that's you already have trust, but you to some degree, but you need to basically replenish some buffers, especially if you have some asymmetric routes. In that case, using Bitcoin and Lightning especially can create a very, very fast settlement internally. But still, I'm not even sure that this function is so different from this kind of geographically distributed store of value. So if you use Strike, you're basically the user is just sending dollars and the other user just receiving dollars, dollar credit and sending dollar credit. And in between, the different companies that will help routing this credit will keep collaterals in Bitcoin, and that will facilitate trust among the people. But that's a relevant use case, but I'm not even sure that is so different from just a company that will keep balance sheets and financial buffers in Bitcoin because it's faster to move. It's easier to move, especially from a bureaucratic point of view. The other payment rail definition could be like recently discussed about RGB or taproot assets, which is basically the same. So we use the same technological infrastructure that we use to send sets to also use some other forms of credits of tokens, and this could represent, for example, fiat money or other things, and we just reuse the relevant technology. This I think it could work, especially because I think that there is the whole universe of so-called stable coins, which I think is a giant case of regulatory arbitrage. Basically, stable coins, technically speaking, are doing nothing that PayPal could not do more efficiently. But the point is that PayPal is legally forbidden from doing that. So when you open PayPal and you send money, you must be KYC'd. When you buy a so-called stable coin, you also must be KYC'd. But when you send it on a secondary market to somebody else, the somebody else must not necessarily be KYC'd. And so you can have a permissionless secondary market, which is only permissioned at the first mile and the last mile. This is interesting because when the regulator goes to the stablecoin issuer and tell them you need to KYC everybody or to confiscate this money or to stop this money, they can say, oh, guys, but it's not my database, not my system. I'm just issuing on the primary market and redeeming on the primary market, and that's fully regulated. And what happens in the secondary market, is the magic blockchain. I don't know it. I cannot stop it. Of course, that's false. Technically, we know it. But regulators are slow, and arbitrage opportunity can expand for many, many years. So I think that Bitcoin and Lightning as technical infrastructure to send around fiat credit could be interesting, mostly as a regulatory arbitrage, basically. Especially RGB and taproot asset are good for privacy compared to like ERC20 stuff, and they're also better for Bitcoin privacy. They also increase Bitcoin privacy instead of reducing it, and they also decrease the danger of MEV attacks, and they also, to some degree, help liquidity bridging in Lightning. So they have some kind of beneficial secondary effect. Then there is the payment rail narrative, which is about using this is basically a blend between the second that I mentioned and the third. So something like stable channels or stable sets. So you have Lightning channels that represent other assets like fiat, but they represent it with the full collateralization in Satoshis based on price oracles. So this is even more complex. I'm not sure this will find a strong market fit, but it's an interesting approach. So I think that while the store of value narrative is very clear to me, very obviously clear, medium of exchange is also clear, but will take more time. It will just depend on market cap and market depth. Payment rails, I think it's a little bit underdefined. It's like really depends on what you mean.
I see. So yeah, go ahead, Alessandro.
Thanks for the explanation, Giacomo. Very clear on the difference between store of value and medium of exchange. Maybe next decade we will move our podcast to Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, when it will become a global store of value, and then will be the next step. You said also importance of privacy that is not coming at the beginning. That's why most of the new joiners first, before they were maybe buying in the exchange, and now some they buy through the ETF, and then they learn about Bitcoin, then they move maybe to exchange and then to self-custody. While it's clear for me that store of value is clear to all, is inevitable, we think in the future everyone will have a portion of their allocation in Bitcoin. It will be like saving in Bitcoin and not anymore investing. Do you think that once we reach this level, self-custody will be for everyone, or for the majority portion of the population, or it will be for a small portion of the population? How you foresee?
I think we have to, I'm sorry to always dig into new nuances, but I think we also have to define self-custody. If we mean the reasonable guarantee that we cannot be stopped from moving the money or confiscated, that our money cannot be moved by other people without our consent, then, or at least that moving our money without our consent is more difficult than now with fiat credit, then definitely yes, there will be a lot of ways to expand this kind of weak definition of self-custody for basically everybody on the planet. And it's already possible today. But if we want to say that we want to achieve a way in which a situation in which literally nobody in any scenario can move my money without my insurance, that's probably only for that's basically only for on-chain single sig full addresses with a lot of confirmation into the UTXO, and that's something that is super it's inherently unscalable. It will become even more scalable over time, unlike Lightning that improves the more participants, the more the network improves in liquidity. The main global consensus, the main chain, basically deteriorates the more people participates. It's global consensus. Everybody, every node has to record every transaction of every other node forever. This cannot scale, and you can play a lot of tricks, and you can try to escape this like universal law of scalability, but you will have to pay something in exchange on some other trade-off, and it's basically inescapable. So, but even in that case, even if you have, let's assume that you have one UTXO in Bitcoin, single sig, all your keys with 100 confirmation, still it's not in theory, in principle, it's not impossible for a majority of mining or of hash rate to reorg 100 blocks in order to undo the payment where you received this money in the first place. So even your single sig on-chain UTXO with 100 confirmation is not impossible theoretically to move against your will. So nothing is complete self-custody. Or let's go to another extreme. If you don't have a general purpose computer without backdoors and without pseudo generators, if you have chips that in your brain that will prevent you from holding secrets, or you have cameras watching every movement of your fingers on your keyboard, you still don't have self-custody, even in Bitcoin. So instead of going theoretical, where full self-custody is impossible, we have to go practical. And practically speaking, there is basically a cascade of possibility. One possibility is I just leave my Bitcoin to you and you just give me credit. This is not self-custody. I think we can all say that. You can improve on that, making it like eCash. So you cannot confiscate my money. You can only run away with all the money or nothing. This is an improvement, but it's still not self-custody. Then there is something like state chain. There was just an implementation coming out last week in JavaScript. State chain are a thing in which the coordinator cannot escape with the money, but it can just double spend, basically. It can just reorg, just like miners, like it was miners. Is this self-custody? Probably not yet, because we are on the border here. It depends on the definition. Then we can move to something like Arc, invented by Burak and now commercially pursued by Marco Argentiero. Arc, is it self-custody? Well, yes, if you remember to connect every 2 weeks and re-roll your funds. Otherwise, the coordinator can take them away if you are offline. Then we go to a Lightning channel. Is that self-custody? Well, yes, unless your peer will try to broadcast the old state and you will not be online to issue the punishment transaction. And then the full on-chain at normal address. Is that self-custody? Well, yes, assuming that you could create the private key without cameras and backdoors on your hardware, and assuming that the miners are not reorging everything before your payment. So you can see it's a spectrum. So what we can see is that we can have, for sure, we can have a equilibrium in the spectrum where most of the economically active people on the planet will reach a level of self-sovereignty of their money, which is compatible with the amount of money and with the time of hodling, basically. To make it more explicit, if you are holding $1 for 1 day, any security, any sovereignty, any self-custody guarantee more than eCash is probably stupid to pay, because nobody will change the world just to steal $1 from you, and if they will, it's just $1. You don't care, and it's just for 1 day, so the probability is very low. If you go to $10 for 10 days, then maybe thinking something like Liquid, where you can avoid fractional reserve, probably it's better. If you go for $100 and 100 days, maybe a state chain will be better. If you go for $1,000 for 1,000 days, maybe an Arc is better for you. If you go from $10,000 and 10,000 days, maybe you want a reliable DRIA pool Lightning channels. And if you go with $100,000 for 100,000 days, then maybe you want to stay on chain single sig. These numbers are made up, of course. I'm just trying to make the case that security is not 1 or 0. And sovereignty and self-sovereignty is not 1 or 0. It's a spectrum. And the more you go, the more you get of that, the more you have to pay for that. And of course, it doesn't always make sense to pay everything. How self-custody is cash under your pillow? Well, depends. If the cops enter your apartment, it's not very self-custody. Somebody else can take it, but they have to be in your city. They have to be able to enter your house. They have to know you have it. If you have an army of private armed guards with machine guns, then you have more self-custody, of course. But it's not worth it for $100. It's worth it when you are like Escobar. So the point is that there is a spectrum between small money and quick time and quick hodling time, which is very medium of exchange kind of scenario, where self-custody requirements can be lowered a lot. And then there is another extreme of the spectrum, which is huge amount of money for very slow, long time windows, where actually it's the other way around. You have to maximize you have to minimize the probability that a third party could move the money against your will. Of course, we cannot explain all these every time we answer. So the very slow, the quick answer, a little bit rhetoric, is yes, we can all become self-custodial without any problem. But this is fine when you are orange pilling somebody and just explain, yeah, you have your private key, it's unconfiscatable. When you have to enter nuances, you have to enter all the nuances, including the fact that nothing is truly sovereign, not even your on-chain address. And there are a lot of reasonable trade-offs, a lot of reasonable rational compromises that you can make depending on the amount and on the speed of transaction.
I see. Maybe let's, Alessandro, have any other question before we go to another
No, please
topic?
go ahead. Thank Giacomo for the detailed explanation.
Okay, so it's not disconnected, but talking about medium exchange, so the current state of Bitcoin, how Bitcoin works now, how do you envision it's going to work? What is needed, what is missing to make it better and better? Because you just mentioned the Lightning Network, which is the hot topic of the year, I would say. We were, me and Alessandro, in Prague, watching your talk. You said like you were a bit trapped from the bit overconfident on the possibilities of the Lightning Network, because you said many people didn't read the white paper very well. It's not that scalable. But luckily the world of tech goes ahead, and as you just mentioned, there is Arc being coded, and that requires a soft fork. So my question is, talking about ossification. I know you're in favor, but could you define better the word ossification? Does it mean that after you ossify the protocol, because you say it's needed like a TCP/IP, then nothing else can be changed forever? Isn't that dangerous? And isn't that a counter argument to the fact that, for instance, Lightning Network wasn't that scalable as we all thought it should have been, and then now we need the soft fork to activate Arc to make it more scalable? Isn't that a contradictory rationale?
Let me address first the assumption, and then I answer your question about ossification. I disagree with the assumption. I think that the Lightning Network was proved to be just as scalable as the first pioneers thought it was, including as you mentioned, the Lightning Network white paper that was mentioning a lot of shortcomings about liquidity, especially incoming liquidity, onboarding problems, and stuff like that. And it could be made way more scalable with a lot of other options, including different degrees of security in channels, going from completely credit-based channels like negative amount to actual channels. We can have stuff like eCash channels, liquid channels, state chain channels, and even ARCs. I didn't mention that as a new. There is a tendency to say, okay, Lightning Network doesn't work. Now we have to create something from scratch. Now there is ARC, and it will fix everything. No, ARC will not fix everything. ARC will just be a special type of Lightning Network multi-party channel or pool, which is just one time over many. And you will be able to use that security model or other security model in routing with each other. So maybe I have a channel with you, Francesco, but you, Francesco, don't have a channel with Alessandro, but you are in the same ARC with Michele, and Michele is has a channel with Carlo that has a credit line with Alessandro. So the power of Lightning is to route all this stuff seamlessly and atomically and automatically, effectively, and it can basically route through every security model, from full custody to basically on-chain with the atomic submarine swaps. So I don't see Lightning as non-scalable. Lightning today is a very homogeneous organism with channels of the same type, basically the Driapun type, which is very secure, very secure, but very problematic from the point of view of onboarding, and it's disconnected from this other solution like Fedimint, but it's getting more and more connected. For example, right now, if you used until a few weeks ago, if you use the wallet Mutiny, if I send you 1 cent and you don't have an active channel to receive it, then you will receive it as an eCash from a mint, from a Fedimint, and only when the amount is big enough that it makes sense to pay the fees to open a channel, you will open a channel. And there are other examples, like the same goes for Minibits. Minibits will do the same with Cashew, with eCash. and it will only open a channel when you have enough money to justify the opening the channel. And the same goes with, to some degree, with Fede Bravo, and the same goes with Mercury Wallet and the Mercury layer. So we already have this kind of trade-off distribution that I mentioned in my previous answer. And the Lightning Network is like the universal language connecting all these different security models in a single routing language that can basically route across everything, which is basically this kind of unifying language. So I don't think that we will find anything more scalable than the Lightning Network. I just think that the Lightning Network will become richer and more diverse internally, hosting a huge variety of security models as opposed to just one, as we do today, which is very, very safe, but also very, very difficult for onboarding, for example, because before you can receive, you need to spend fees to open a channel. And because if your channel gets closed accidentally under high fees, you will spend a lot of money. So it's just a temporary, very temporary growth pain of the network as it is, but it's not a fundamental problem. And also the second objection is that it's not true that a construct like an asymmetric coordinated pool like Arc can only be done with a soft fork. Arc actually can be done without a soft fork, and is being built right now without a soft fork. It's called Clark, which is Covenantless Arc. So it's an Arc without Covenant, Clark, and that works. The problem is just it works not as well, because you basically have a lot of interactivity, which limits the UX and the security a lot compared to a full-fledged Arc with a soft fork. So we can already do that, just not as well, not as good. You have this ugly interactivity requirement. And the same goes for normal Lightning channels. With Covenants, we could do cold channels that have better privacy, better scalability. And we could, with another kind of Covenant, which is C-cache no input, we could have L2 channels or Lightning Symmetry, which are safer for the backups and can easily be expanded to multi-party. So we can do a lot of stuff with Covenants, but we can do a lot of stuff without Covenants. And if necessary, we will do a lot of stuff without Covenants. It's not like people are trying to frame it like it's the only way. It's not. That now let's move to the question about ossification. The way that ossification was used, the word has been used for a lot of things, mostly negative, but it has been used for the internet, analyzing the internet and other IT systems in a neutral to even positive way. And in particular, it's known that the TCP/IP protocol suite, basically the internet, ossified in the base layer. What does it mean? It means that while the internet website will change every day and every month, that some internet products like Facebook and MySpace will change slower, in a slow way, because there is a network effect. Underneath it, there is the HTTP or the web, and that will change because it does change, but even slower. The web is changing every like 5 years, 10 years as a protocol. And then underneath HTTP, there is, or HTTPS, HTTP2, there is TCP. TCP is even slower in its changes. And underneath it, there is IP. And IP as a protocol itself is not changing anymore since version 4 in 1984. Now, there is version 6, which is slowly taking some part of the internet, but still backward compatible, and it's basically not changing anymore. So that's called an ossification of the protocol. But there is a lot of equivocation. The first equivocation is ossification of IP version 4 doesn't mean that the internet itself is not changing anymore. The internet is changing a lot since 1984, a lot, completely. It's unrecognizable. We are now doing a space on Twitter, something inconceivable in 1984. Everything changed. The infrastructure changed, the libraries changed, the software changes, the browser changes, the libraries changes, the user habits changes, the use cases changes, everything changed basically. Even the upper layers changed a lot. The only thing that didn't change was the rules of the base layer. The second equivocation is that even if the IP protocol, the internet protocol rules are the same as 1984, that doesn't mean that the software implementation is the same. There are some routers that are still running very, very old firmware, and they're still compatible with the network. But more recent routers will have very, very recent firmware that has been re-encoded and basically rebased and redeveloped from scratch several times to be more and more efficient. The rules are the same, but the code that implements the rules is changing continuously, becoming more and more efficient. But the fact that the rules are the same is still important, because it means that it cannot be easily. Well, I will go later to the point of the risk. Let me continue with this discussion. So first thing is not the internet ossified; it's just IP version 4. Second, is not the software implementation, just the rules of the protocol. Third, is not that no change is possible. If tomorrow we find a dramatic, lethal bug in IP version 4, something which is inherently wrong, not in the implementation, but in the protocol itself, that will require changing a rule, otherwise the IP4 will die, you can rest assured that a huge amount of the global internet will upgrade to survive, basically, and the part that will not upgrade will just die. And so the network, the internet as a whole, will very easily find the coordination. But the difference is that you cannot do arbitrary or non-vital, you cannot do non-existential changes anymore. So if you come up with IP version 5, like they did in the 90s, and you think it's better, but not everybody's convinced, then you cannot fight against the inertia of the system. You cannot change from IP version 4 to IP version 5, especially because it was not backward compatible, and the network will just ignore you if you try. That doesn't mean that you cannot change if it's needed to change. Of course, if there was a bug in IP version 4, the network would upgrade, but any kind of non-lethal bug will not be enough to convince everybody. There is not an infinite inertia, but it's like a super strong inertia that will prevent corporations or governments from pushing a change, because the network will just not care. So with these three distinctions, it's easy to imagine an ossification in Bitcoin that is not Bitcoin as a network, as a system. Bitcoin will change because mining will change, wallets will change, users will change, liquidity will change, market cap will change, upper layers will change, but just of the rules of the Bitcoin base layer. That's the only thing. And not the implementation that will change a lot, but just the rules, just the protocol, and not against any kind of change, but just again arbitrary change. Of course, there is a limit to this analogy. The main limit is that internet IP had a formal specification, so it's easy to implement different firmwares of routers that will follow the IP specification. Bitcoin doesn't have a written specification. The specification is basically it was Satoshi's client. So it's trickier to abstract the rules from the software in the case of Bitcoin. Not impossible. People are working on Bitcoin consensus kernels, but it's trickier. So it would probably be less obvious how to do it. But we can do it. We can upgrade upper layers, and we can upgrade software, and we can change the rules in case of lethal bugs or super existential bugs like an inflation bugs. Now, about the risks. Changing the rules, the ability to change the rules, especially at the base layer, is a danger, because corporations and government can basically try to change the network to basically to domesticate it, to weaken it, to dilute it, to basically neutralize it from some of the most disruptive characteristic. Somebody could say, and that's a good point, that even not changing has a risk, but even here there is an asymmetry. The risk of changing is unbounded. So what you can do, changing the rules, is literally everything. You can basically blacklist, you can do whitelist of addresses, you can do inflation, you can do the Fed with a special key that will change the inflation issuance rate, you can do selective automatic taxation where UTXOs are scripts are unlockable by your key or by the IRS. You can do literally everything, basically corrupting the very nature of the protocol's goal. While not changing is a risk, but that's a bounded risk. There is only so many things that can happen to us if we don't change. And mostly, I don't think there are many. One thing is that there is a little bug that will kill the network. But in that case, we will change because it's just obvious, like the coordination. In order finding coordination to make an arbitrary change is impossible under ossification. But finding coordination enough to make an obvious change that will save the network lives, that will be trivial to do. If you just have two options, one option the network dies and the other doesn't, I will run the second option. I don't know about you, but I will run the second. If you make any other change, I will not run the change until I'm super convinced, and it's becoming harder and harder to convince me and other people to upgrade. So these two ideas, they are not consistent. The third idea is competition. You keep the network not changing, and you overcompete the network with other things. But the problem is that I don't think that's possible for the simple reason that other things are by definition centralized. So if a CBDC is going to overcompete Bitcoin, that means that the people that are using the CBDC, they didn't have a use case for Bitcoin, because it means that they are fine with confiscation and with inflation, and so they don't need Bitcoin. It's fine. That's just fiat. It's just fiat overcompeting fiat. The people that need Bitcoin, they need censorship resistance and they need inflation resistance. And to achieve that, they need decentralization, and nothing else can bring the same characteristic. Nothing else, not shitcoins for sure. And the paradox here is that I think I'm right about this, but even if I'm wrong, I'm fine, because if I'm wrong that shitcoins cannot take over Bitcoin, I think they can't, because they're all centralized. They are doomed to be by game theory. But even if a new shitcoin becomes as decentralized as Bitcoin, so what, and has inflation resistant, and it become a new Schelling point, avoiding infinite inflation of shitcoins, then okay, I'm happy. I will just use the shitcoin, and it will not be a shitcoin anymore at that point. So there is a point about maximalism. If I'm right, Bitcoin has no competition. If I'm wrong, then I'm happy, because Bitcoin now can have competition, and I can just use some other shitcoin or some other so-called crypto. So you see, if we change Bitcoin for fear of the competition, we lose Bitcoin anyway, because we lose the consistency. Instead, if we don't change it, worst case scenario, Bitcoin dies and we just use something else. If the competition was possible in the first place, that's not a problem. I would just be a little bit poorer from the trading point of view, because I would be late into buying the other shitcoin. But that's not a big problem. I would just make it. I would just overcompensate working more. I don't know. But it's not a point, you see. So in this sense, ossification of the basic rules, I think, will be inevitably, as long as Bitcoin is decentralized, it will be inevitable, because in a decentralized network, coordinating arbitrary changes is harder and harder with the passage of time. As long you need strong centralization to coordinate hard forks, and even to some degree soft forks. That said, I think that ossification will be good eventually, because it will prevent unbounded risk of change, trading it with the bounded risk of not changing it. But I think that it's too early, and I would love for Bitcoin to ossify after at least the covenants or a partial aggregation of inputs, cross inputs, I mean, and some stuff like that, because we can have better than this. Maybe we will also have some fatal bugs, like block number overflow, timestamp overflow. This stuff will be fixed, because nobody will run a network that is going to die. So everybody will move to a trivial fix that doesn't contradict ossification. So I think it's too early to ossify, and I would love for some good covenant proposal and cross-input aggregation proposal to make it inside the protocol before. But if not, Bitcoin will be fine.
That's a fantastic answer. You relieved me because it's still safe doing that. I don't know. It's not immediate if you're not that technical. And I think it was a misconception and fear many people had because the word ossification sounds a bit dangerous, but it doesn't sound dangerous anymore. So thank you. Staying in this topic, because think about when one day there will be this, there will be the right time to ossify. Who is going to call the shots? Talking about Bitcoin core contributors, we have seen that at the launch of DTF, there was a bit of debate because some issuers start donating to the contributors. Was that a positive thing or a negative thing for you? And also, how do you see the power and the rules of the core contributors? Who should select them? How long should they stay contribute to a network? Is there a limit, like a president or not? For what reason? How do you see the whole story about the core contributors?
I think the connection between ossification and core, the core Bitcoin core process of development, not the theoretical one, the practical one on GitHub and the Bitcoin core org and the Bitcoin dev meetup or pseudo organization. I think that's a very good connection, and it makes a lot of sense because that's the point. I think that ossification will come, and ossification will be happened when people will not be able to find consensus and Schelling point around Bitcoin Core as a software implementation. Because when that will happen, people will still be able to run other node implementations. Some of them will be just deviation from core, like Luke Dashir Knots or Peter Todd's Liber Relay. I mentioned these two because I think they're very funny. Peter and Luke, they're both good friends of mine. I respect both very much. And they disagree a lot on a lot of things. And recently they had this vicious disagreement about basically mempool filtering. But it's vicious, but it's funny that they ended up agreeing to disagree with Bitcoin Core, because what Peter did is to eliminate almost completely some filters from the mempool because of incentive compatibility concerns. And he created Libre Bitcoin, and he's saying that Bitcoin Core is broken because it's not implementing Libre Relay, basically. And he's criticizing Bitcoin Core development process because they are not fixing a possible impactful bug with the package relay, with the new mempool 2 and these other initiatives. So Peter is pushing people not to run core, but to run his version, which is Libre Relay. And look, for opposite reasons, like he fixed, instead of removing the filters, he fixed the filters and is pushing the people to run knots, which I do, by the way. And but the thing is that these are two implementations that are derived from core, but they disagree at this point with the process of cores. And people that follow Peter and people that follow Luke, they're just a small bunch, but they are opinion leaders, you know. So it's starting to happen. And then you have the complete redesign of the node from scratch, like LibBitcoin. LibBitcoin by Eric Voskuil is something which a lot, I mean, I will not run it for my money or for my company. It's still experimental, but not being bounded by the original Satoshi design in C++, it is super performant compared to Bitcoin Core. It has a performance that Bitcoin Core cannot achieve because it was redesigned from scratch. So there are all these other node implementation, like LND is using this implementation in Go. So most of Bitcoin Lightning nodes using LND, they are not using Bitcoin Core, or most of them are anyway. So the moment in which all the other soft forks have been basically decided, coordinated, using Bitcoin Core process development as a tool for consensus, for agreement. The process is itself very decentralized. It's not a single company, not a single organization. There's not a single leader. There's not Satoshi anymore. There's not even Gavin Andresen anymore. It's very decentralized internally, but it is still a process with some outcomes, a political process to a degree. And all the soft cores have been coordinated by that. And my understanding is that if Bitcoin Core doesn't come to basically to select and push let's say Covenant or another kind of soft fork as long as it is still a sharing point, not for me anymore maybe, but for most users, automatically they just download Bitcoin Core. And if that doesn't happen, after Bitcoin Core is no longer a sharing point, the coordination for a news, of course, will become impossible, and we will have practical ossification. The tricky thing is that even if Bitcoin Core people understand this, if they try to rush a sub fork, fighting against time in order to push one in before ossification, that's still bad, because if they try to rush something which is not really appreciated by the user base, then this will just accelerate the rejection of Bitcoin Core from the users as a reference implementation. So I think that there are basically three scenarios. One is Bitcoin Core will just stop pushing sub forks, and it will remain the reference implementation for very, very long. Two, Bitcoin Core will push sub forks in an unwanted way and will lose, because of this, the role of sharing point. Three, Bitcoin Core will not push sub forks, but will still become irrelevant, maybe because people will want sub fork and they are not able to push it. So it's a very tricky thing, and I'm not saying that as a criticism to single people in Bitcoin Core in the past or the present. It's just that in a decentralized system, governance is borderline impossible, and it must be borderline impossible. If there is a predictable and effective governance system, that's a failure in decentralization, because it could be played, it could be takeover. So there is no governance, and there is less and less governance every year. And I think this is very consistent with the path toward ossification.
Yeah, that's the contrast gives us the idea that when the coordination is impossible, as you say, then it's not going to change anymore. Therefore, can be ossified at that point to support the solidity of the network, as I understood. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, no, Alessandro, you want to ask any question? Maybe.
Yes, thanks for the explanation also on ossification, Giacomo. I think we barely had such explanation on technical side of Bitcoin, so great to have in our podcast. And I have a different question on PlanB, Giacomo. I know that you do a lot of things. You work a lot on educating Bitcoin around the world, especially focusing in Lugano. If you can give us an update on which are your recent projects and what is the plan for the next months.
Yeah, we just finished the PlanB Business School. That was a school for people that were not trying to enter into a Bitcoin profession from the point of view of software development or cryptography, but from the point of view of business development. And that was a great experience. It culminated with the summer school in Lugano with 21 students from all around the world. It was beautiful, very intense. People are still recovering, not me, but especially the students, because we really destroyed them, like a lot of hours of lecture every day. It was very intense, but they had a lot of fun. Now we have to see the result of that, which, for what I'm concerned, is mostly about the rate of employability and of funding and startup creation. So if from those 21 students, we will have a lot of employed people in good positions in Bitcoin companies, and a lot of builders creating startups funded by our ecosystem partners, that's a good success for me. If not just the 21, but also the other 120 people that participated to the whole school, that would be a great victory for me. If not, then we have to adjust and to change until it is. And then we will start immediately, basically in August, the campaign for the second school, which will be the tech school, which will be targeted not at business developers, but as software developers and cryptographers. So the technical part, which will start end of September and probably will reach the culmination in the last week of November in San Salvador. We are still, logistics is not obvious, so we're still addressing it. These are the schools that we are running, that I'm basically running directly as a director of the PlanB network. But there are a lot of schools that are not running directly, and I'm just federating, and I run from other people. There are courses, free courses and paid courses in many languages and on many topics that are made by other teachers, and we just provide a platform as a federation platform so that they can sell education that we approve, of course, that we select. It's not like an open platform. It's a curated platform where we select like people that already agree with us, or like Jimmy Song, Knut Svanson, Saifedian Amus. There are a lot of people that will provide education content through the platform, and we just help them with the platform. Parallel to this effort of education, PlanB Network will also try to federate physical places. So all these communities, these nodes around the world, we try to boost them as physical meetings. For example, my objective, partially successful, I think, for the B school that I will replicate for the tech school, is that if you want to, let's say there is a lecture, this is a real story. There is a lecture of Obi in Bangkok, in the PlanB node of Bangkok, which is called Bob, Building on Bitcoin. People that will go there will listen to the lecture live in front of the teacher. But people that are in San Salvador, instead of watching that in remote from their computer, they will still gather in the San Salvador node, Cubo Plus, and they will watch it together from there, so that at any moment they can create a group, they can have a local educator helping, translating. So the idea is that during the PlanB network schools, in every node of the network, there will be only something going on, even if it's not local, even if Saifedian will be teaching in Lugano, there will be a node in Ghana where people will meet to watch live Saifedian teaching and maybe ask questions. This is logistically very challenging, technologically very challenging. Now we are doing this platform integrated with Kit and Hole Punch, but it was actually we used just YouTube for the first iteration because we were not ready. But we will be better and better at the platform structure. And the idea is to also create this kind of network of physical places that can also turn into a network of, business incubators, business accelerators, and all these other kind of functions, which is not so different from the old idea of Bitcoin embassies. And that's basically can itself be the first seed for something bigger, like this kind of small citadel network. But that's a little bit ambitious, and we will see in the future.
Yeah, great updates on all schools, physically, online, and the support from other Bitcoiners. I think likely once we have the bull run, if Bitcoin is reaching 3-digit, so more than 100K, probably also the demand will increase and scalability will be more possible. What do you think?
Yeah, could be even. I'm very satisfied with the demand for this one. Considering we did basically zero marketing, we reached a good amount. So probably for the tech school and the B school, I'm not aiming at maximizing the number. I want to maximize conversion to actual active Bitcoiners participating in the industry. I don't want just to have a lot of numbers. As long as it's self-sustainable from a budget point of view, I don't care for a lot of reach out. But yes, of course, we have to be ready for the wave of awareness that comes with the new bull cycle. Absolutely.
Okay, yes, makes sense. Pointing mostly on the conversion and on exactly on this conversion and working in a Bitcoin ecosystem. How did you take the news that Swan had some layoff in the last 10 days? Nix also, I saw Sam Callahan and Stefan Livera also, they were impacted by the layoff. I think probably because of the mining industry of Swan. So it was a kind of a bit of a shock for the whole Bitcoin ecosystem.
I'm not sure it's mostly about mining, but it's a very complicated story. But anyway, whatever is the reason, there was this layoff wave, and I mean that's sad because people are. The economic plans for you and your family are important. That said, that's a big opportunity for us. I didn't have time yet to contact these people individually, but we will, me and Roxy and the others. And we will propose them to do courses with PlanB Network for sure. Like Stefan Livera, we will not do a course with Stefan. If the business model is not anymore sponsorship, I think it can be. So we can easily find other sponsors through PlanB for Stefano education content for free. But also, if it's not for free, I mean, free stuff is overrated. People will not commit to free stuff. They will perceive some level of lack of value. So the best thing to do is to find sustainable business model, and we will talk with these people for sure, and we will build it together.
Good.
Yeah, I would suggest.
Francesco, please
I
go
would
ahead.
suggest. I would suggest this episode of the podcast, for instance, can clearly go on the PlanB network site, because the level of insight about ossification, the lighting network, the state of the network is impressive. So if you want, we give you the credit.
Thank you. And everybody can actually put it on. You just go on the GitHub, PlanB network, that you can find on the website, and you pull request the addition in the podcast section. And it will, if we don't do it, we will do it eventually. But if any of the listeners want to see these on PlanB network, you go there. There is a tutorial how to commit stuff on the GitHub, and you can just do it, and it will be merged by ASIO pretty soon. The website, if you go on planb.network, there are already listed most of the podcasts, so you can add yours very, very easily.
Yeah, we'll do.
Another question that is more controversial, because not all Bitcoin have the same opinion. Yesterday it closed the Bitcoin conference in 2024. I also saw you wrote a long thread on this. Would be nice if you summarize the thread, your opinion, and what you think about not only Trump participating, but it looks like all US politics is or in favor or less against. Also, Kamala Harris now said they want to have a reset, a new start with the crypto. They say crypto world. We know that Bitcoin is not crypto, but we cannot expect that they know the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. So if they say this, I think it's good. We take what we get. It's good for Bitcoin. What is your take?
I think these things are a symptom and not a cause of Bitcoin success. It's just like to different degree is like micro sailor and MicroStrategy, or even to some degree Bukele and El Salvador. These people decided to be pioneers in this process, but if it was not them, I'm convinced it will be others. That doesn't take away from their merit to understand it, but if it was not El Salvador, it would have been maybe not with the same degree of intelligence, political intelligence, but some other place. So if Bitcoin wins, politicians and corporations will have to adapt, and not the other way around. I think that we should, the Bitcoin makes sense because it doesn't need permission from politicians. So we should keep building the infrastructure and the software and the culture as independent from permission and authorization from politicians. That said, we should accept as natural the other way around. If we build it correctly, the support from politicians will arrive, just because if something is unstoppable, politicians will come on board to try to claim, to take credits, or to try to buy votes, basically. Let's say my opinion about Trump is more articulated. I discussed it in the thread about this Bitcoin and crypto, the part in which Trump thinks that Bitcoin will coadjuvate the US dollar instead of be a threat to it. I think that's false, and that doesn't make any sense. But there are a lot of particulars about him, about Kennedy. But the main point is that it's not that it's not like we have to seek politicians to protect Bitcoin. If we do Bitcoin right, politicians will align them. Some politicians will align themselves just because of game theory, but it's the other way around. It works just because we build the system that cannot be stopped by them.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree. I have two remarks on this. We can also see the financialization, the institutional also doing the same. Is a victory of Bitcoin that we had now the ETF. Like 15 years ago, Satoshi sent an email, and now the biggest institution are running after Bitcoin. So if it was not maybe BlackRock last year, it would have been someone else next year or in 2 years. But we cannot we cannot expect that a full total Bitcoin adoption as a store of value without having politics and financial world involved in Bitcoin. And this is more a victory of Bitcoin. See, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly, and not the other way around. is I think that we have two wrong possible approaches. One wrong approach is to simp, like they say, for these people and depend on them and take a lecture from them about what is Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is for, and to change Bitcoin to please them. That would be the main mistake. We should not change Bitcoin to please them. We should not make them leaders of Bitcoin. On the other way around, we cannot get angry if Bitcoin succeeds so much that these people will just get on board. It's just natural. It's the other way around. The cause and the effect are reversed. Because Bitcoin works, we have Michael Saylor and not the other way around.
Totally. And I think it's also benefits for people like you who are deeply into education, because once we have on one side institution approaching Bitcoin in a more favored manner, and also I think they maybe common US citizen is seeing that what Kennedy Jr. said, that Trump participated at Bitcoin conference 2024. Also Kamala, also Democrats are changing. Till some months ago they were strictly against. Then they approve Ethereum ETF. As said, Bitcoin and Ethereum they're completely different world, but in their view is crypto. So it's favor for Bitcoin. So also seeing this, they will make them also more likely to investigate what is Bitcoin, and more likely maybe to look up for your videos or your education material.
Yeah, there is always a trade-off between between adoption and purity. This trade-off is inescapable. If you try to maximize only for adoption, then you can dilute your message so much that it becomes the same as the things that you want to replace. And if you try to maximize too much for purity, then you will be very pure alone, and you will not affect the world around you. But this is not just for Bitcoin. This is the same for like music styles, people in the punk music or the early rock music or the true heavy metal music. You always have the problem. Do I want something so pure that it's significant, but it's irrelevant because nobody cares, or so widespread that it changes the world, but then it doesn't change it very much because it has lost its own soul in the process of trying to be adopted. I think with Bitcoin is the same, just stronger, because the distance between Bitcoin and fiat is larger than the distance between heavy metal and rockabilly. So it's a little bit more ambitious, our project, and in the central banking is a little bit more than just hardening your metal sound. So I think that this dynamic is even stronger. We have to find a soft spot between these two extremes, pure but alone, or mass adopted but diluted into nothing. And we have to stay in between and to avoid both traps, which is not easy.
Yeah, and I would say as educators, people trying to spread the word, we should use a strategy. And the strategy maybe is the variable which can make sway the consensus faster or slower, and that's also on us. If you agree.
Well, also we also can divide, division of labor, divide and conquer. The strategy of the bad cop and the good cop is a very ancient strategy, and we can adopt that. We will have some people that will maximize purity and will scare away the bad actors, and will scare away people that are not ready, and will increase purity at the expense of adoption. And then we will have the good cop, the appeaser, that will maximize adoption, even in some cases at the expenses of purity of the message. So you have both, and if they can work together, that's super effective.
On the intervention from Trump, I'm impressed that no one in his entourage told him you can say anything but not crypto. Like I think it's the word that people should avoid the most in a Bitcoin conference. But he kept saying a few times Bitcoin, crypto, whatever you want. And this is also diluted that message. And I also listened to Kennedy Jr. and he has a different understanding of Bitcoin, much higher. I think it's clear for what he said. He always only discuss about Bitcoin. I think this is already a differentiation.
I think that there are many explanations for this. One explanation is that Trump is not as easy to brief as Kennedy or others. Trump is very, I was impressed by the level of briefing that Trump received, I assume from David Bailey. I have to give it to him. It was impressive. He mentioned a lot of Bitcoin memes, a lot of Bitcoin rhetoric point, very, very impressive. So he clearly received a strong briefing, especially because he didn't know anything about Bitcoin a few years ago. But probably not so much as Kennedy. Kennedy is a minority candidate that is basically actively seeking countercultural constituencies, trying to get very specific about central bank. And same goes for Vivek in the Republican Party. Vivek was very strong with Bitcoin rhetoric. Trump is a miracle that he was briefed so much as it was. So the difference between I mentioned in the thread that a few years ago, the difference between Bitcoin and shitcoin was clear in the US Congress when Congressman Davidson, made the shitcoin comment in the Congress. But now with Trump, it was probably difficult to stress this difference. Also, the second point is that, this is basically the same point, but unlike Vivek and Kennedy, Trump is a majority candidate really trying to win over a big constituency, so he cannot maximize purity. He cannot afford to make too many shitcoiners angry. So he needs something broader than maximalists, while that was not the case for Kennedy or especially Vivek. The second point is that Trump himself just finished to become, he was an anti-Bitcoin and also to a degree anti-shitcoin guy until a couple of years ago, vocally anti-crypto. And then he turned into a huge shitcoiner selling NFTs, Trump NFTs. So there was a huge money grab of this like fake stuff that he sold. So going full maximalist in this condition was probably a little bit contradictory for the character. So he decided to say crypto and Bitcoin. So it's not the worst form of shitcoinery that will just mention crypto, assuming that Bitcoin is part of crypto. It's mentioning basically two things, which is already something, Bitcoin and crypto, but it cannot go as far as only talk about Bitcoin. He has to include shitcoins because he is also a shitcoiner. And I think that the third and last reason is that you say that at the Bitcoin conference, the term crypto is not very welcome, which is true at a Bitcoin conference. But the Bitcoin conference in Nashville is a Bitcoin magazine conference, which is mostly about selling NFT and other bullshit in especially ordinance and stuff like that. So I think that is not really concerned for that kind of audience. The kind of audience that goes to Nashville is probably very, very shitcoin friendly. There were panels with a lot of notorious shitcoiners. So I don't think it's a problem in that conference. It would be a problem if Trump went to Baltic Honey Badger. It would probably be a problem if Trump went to Unconfiscatable, or it would be a problem, but not in Nashville, really.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I told Alessandro you stopped going there 3 years ago, if I'm not wrong. Last time he was there.
Yeah.
You didn't have a good opinion of that. I told him that's not a problem. Go ahead.
Sorry, I missed the question.
It's not a question. When was the last time you attended the Bitcoin conference?
I went only. So I followed the conference remote in the year of Salvador Law and Ross Ulbricht. So it was 2021. 2021, I was invited to speak. I couldn't go, but I really wanted to go, and it was amazing to follow it in Miami. Then the next year, 2022, I went, and it was, let's say, not as good. It was still Bitcoin only, mostly, but there were a lot of NFT bullshit in the art exposition, and the quality was, going from Ross Ulbricht and Salvador announcement to that was a little bit anticlimactic. Then 2023, I think it was the real shit show with Bitcoin Wizard heavily promoted this kind of shit. And this year was very bad. And also their conference in in Hong Kong, I've seen a few parts of it and it was terrible, abysmal. So I stopped probably. I decided I was invited to speak in 2023. I proposed to do my speech about ordinals, the same speech I gave in Prague. I asked for 40 minutes and the freedom to choose the title. And they said that I could only do 20 minutes is a small, not recorded stage. And the prize was that I had to do 40 minutes with the Bitcoin Wizard trolls on main stage in order to do that. So I said, no, thank you. I go to do my speech in Prague. And since then, I never accepted the speech request anymore. And I don't think I will. I mean, at this point, I'm not in the best relationship with Bitcoin Magazine, and I don't care to be frank.
Do you think the reason why they are so on NFTs and ordinals, because let me rephrase before, like once you study money, it's clear that everything that, so Bitcoin is money, and whatever we put on top is undermining the value proposition of Bitcoin as money. But if someone is working in the industry, only having Bitcoin as money is also making the business smaller. So I think one reason I think some Bitcoiners or some people in Bitcoin world also, they promote ordinals, NFT, and all the rest is also because they want to make more money, and the simple narrative Bitcoin money is not enough. So they are tempted to go in this direction. And I see also similar path to always to push so much on Bitcoin as a medium of exchange to all the merchants that for me, for the global adoption at this time is obvious that they will not have so much success.
Yeah, I'm very much agree. So if you use Bitcoin for your business, if you have a business, like you sell pizza and use Bitcoin for your business, it makes sense. Bitcoin will treat you very well. If you keep your treasury in Bitcoin and you accept Bitcoin for payments, and maybe you use Bitcoin for tax evasion, avoidance or whatever, you will be happy of using Bitcoin. But if you try to do a business entirely on Bitcoin, it's very complex because Bitcoin is made in a way that doesn't need many intermediaries. So I do the same with education to a degree, and so far I'm happy, but it's hard because, okay, education, let's say it works because it's hard enough that you are needed. A good teacher is not commodity, so okay, you can provide that. Teaching a school with walls and chairs is not commodity, so you can sell that. But now imagine that you're running a conference. Bitcoin only is hard because after a while, yes, okay, it's Bitcoin, but it's still Bitcoin. You can see that with your podcast. After a while, it's hard to compete with a lot of other exponential bullshit if you just stay on the realistic case, because you have to repeat the same thing over and over again. So you miss the novelty effect, and you don't have a lot of other ways to monetize. For example, you do investment management. So think about you are a wealth manager and you are a Bitcoin maximalist who understood Bitcoin. So now your wealth manager value proposition is going to the client and you say, dear client, give me your money. We just buy Bitcoin and keep it here. And then the client will ask, well, I can do it myself. And your answer will be, oh, well, actually, yes. While if you introduce shitcoins and NFTs and whatever, you can pretend you're useful. If you can push for the covenant drama as it's a matter of life or death, then you can say that your conference is enabling the change. David Beatty called it Bitcoin phase 2. So it's like I'm needed, I'm participating. What I'm doing is changing Bitcoin. That's the same as the New York Agreement. When the previous conference consensus, they did the New York Agreement to change Bitcoin, to save it. So you want to promote yourself as fundamental for Bitcoin. In order to do that, you have to do shitcoining and this kind of stuff, because otherwise Bitcoin is built in a way where we individually don't matter that much. I mean, we do matter for our lives and dreams and expectations and skills, but not for Bitcoin. Bitcoin can do without any of us. And recognizing that requires a lot of humility, and evidently the people involved there don't really shine for humility among other skills.
Thanks for the explanation. I agree also quite detailed. Maybe they arrive at one point, they say, okay, if we want to go on with so much people we need to expand. And unfortunately for Bitcoin, they expanded. But there are likely we have many other Bitcoin markets like you who keep the message clear on Bitcoin and money. I will have one last question, because also is one of the question I had from many people on risk for Bitcoin. Many there are misconceptions, but other are also asking, is quantum computing a risk for Bitcoin? I know you made a long video some years ago. If you have, if you can summarize what we should reply on this, because if you have some also new nuances now, considering that that world is developing fast.
I think my old video is still very much actual. We don't have a single general purpose logical qubit. So my answer, very brief answer, would be still no. It's not a threat. I mean, everything is a theoretical threat, including space pirates that will use curvature, they will use general relativity warp engines to mine across the galaxy. That's physically possible, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Or nano machines that will basically attack the planet and turn every single mineral and human being into an ASIC to maximize Bitcoin mining. That's possible from the point of view of artificial intelligence and nano machines, but it's not going to happen very fast. A general purpose Shor break or ACDSA breaking quantum computer with 25,000 logical error corrected qubits in coherence is not a realistic threat, and it's not going to be a realistic threat for very, very long. I will change my mind when I will see one single logical error corrected general purpose qubit. We need 20,000 of that, maybe 10,000 if we find smart ways. When I will see one of those, just one, I will maybe start to change my mind. So far, we just have physical qubits. We can go to 20 of those. We can maybe go to 100 of those in coherence, but those qubits are not error corrected, so they cannot be reliable enough to break strong cryptography. So we're still very, very, very far away. And we may be far away from a theoretical point of view. It's not just an engineering problem. It may be a fundamental physics problem. And many quantum computing scientists, they know this. The problem is that, it's just like Bitcoin engineers will tell you something, but then crypto influencers will tell you something else. The same goes with neural network experts and AI influencer. The same goes with actual quantum computing experts and quantum hype people. So far, it's really not. If I had to bet all my bitcoins on a public key which can be break, I would, and I don't think it will happen in my lifetime. If I'm wrong, I think it's conceivable it could happen maybe in 30, 50 years. But first, I want to see one logical qubit, and then I will start to think about it.
Then there is the logic argument that if some technology will not come out of the blue, it will be known as this is about to come, and maybe it can be made Bitcoin quantum resistant by developers. Am I right?
You're right. It's not even a problem. The problem is that you don't do it if it's not needed, because quantum resistant cryptography, as of now, from Lamport to hash-based signatures, they are big. They are slow to validate, so they decrease scalability a lot, and they're still very early. So many of them has not been battle tested as implementations. So some of those turned out to be classically broken a few years ago. So it's still very, very early. So to use an untested cryptography with very large signatures that will reduce scalability a lot and increase centralization, we do it if it's necessary. So if quantum computers pop up, we can just push an emergency soft fork. It's just a soft fork. And the point is how to protect the old addresses, like the old PK addresses. But mostly we can fix it. Probably we can coordinate to fix it in 1 month. But the problem is that we don't want that kind of cryptography unless it's absolutely necessary, because it's very, very slow, very, very big, and very, very untested.
Yeah, I know an American developer who started doing that. I know him, he's from Denver 1 month ago. I will send you, we'll post a comment on it. So maybe it's anticipating too much, but somebody is already thinking about it.
Well, I mean, nothing is, I'm not against preparing stuff. Like if you prepare an emergency soft fork so that whenever something crazy happens, you can just push a button and you can easily create consensus. It's just like people did, like Luke did it with Malice and proof of work change. I don't think we will make a proof of work change because it's too disruptive. But if we want to do it, it's better to prepare that years in advance and agree over the best implementation that we will never use, just like an atomic bomb, basically. That's an atomic bomb.
Yeah, totally.
Sadly, I have to go,
Yes.
but it was a pleasure,
Yes.
and speak soon.
Thanks a lot, Giacomo. We really
Yeah.
appreciate your presence, and for sure is a lot of educational material for all the listeners now here in X, otherwise in YouTube or Spotify. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alex. Bye.
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 Bye.